I've already had that conversation with 3 of them. But I don't know how long the audit but I think it's going to be accepted. Right. So when I read it, say, make sure I stress prohibited. Got it. Yeah, yeah. There you go. So I can send it to us. Okay, all ready, are you?
These are my notes.
Okay. 7:01, we will call this regular city council meeting to order on Monday, December 2nd, 2019. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Horn?
Present.
Mr. Bateman?
Present.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Present.
Mr. Welch?
Present.
Mr. Parrott?
Present.
Mr. Downs?
Present.
Mr. Keller?
Present.
Mr. Haneke?
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have anyone that would like to speak under public participation? Okay, and then we've got the presentation of the annual budget, or audit, I'm sorry. You're up, sorry.
We've got the complete audit report, which is this year 92 pages. I won't go through 92 pages, and I did a summary of basically 92 pages as best I could. So I will go over the summary instead of the big audit report. I'll make references to it because there's a lot of information in the notes. But page 1 of the summary, it shows the governmental activities, which is your general fund, motor fuel tax, and all the other small special revenue funds. And it combines everything. It does also include the pension obligations for the IMRF, the 2 IMRF, and the police and fire. And then it also includes your obligation for post-retirement benefits as well, insurance. Okay, so you have total assets. You can see the breakdown. We have current assets, capital assets, and deferred outflows related to pensions. So you can see the comparison with the prior year. Total assets at $39,305,000. And then liabilities. We break down by your current liabilities, your notes and bonds payable. We do have additional information related to the notes and bonds. Pages 32 through 37 in the notes gives details of each note, bond, and lease payable. It gives the breakdown of the amortization and when they're due and how much is paid each year. Net pension liability, you can see the balance on that. We do have additional notes related to it in the report, pages 39 through 62. There's a lot of information related to those. You can see each IMRF, what is due for each one, and the police and fire as well. Your OPEB obligation, again, that's an expanded note this year. It did require us to record the whole obligation. Before we only had to record the balance that was due the following year. This year we did have to record the whole balance of your obligation because you don't have a trust fund set up for it. So accounting standards requires that we report the whole balance for the OPEB obligation, and you can see that in the notes as well. So your total liabilities amounted to $56,882,000 for the year. And then your net position at the end of April as well. Okay, your statement of activities shows the revenues and expenses for the governmental funds. And you can see the breakdown by taxes, fees, grants, and other income. You have total revenues, $9,105,000. And then your expenses, we just broke down by function, which is general government, public safety, public works, and your interest on your debt that was paid. So your total expenditures of $11,263,000. So that did bring you a net change in your fund balance of a negative $2,157,000. Okay. The next sheet, I present the general fund and the motor fuel tax. Those are considered your major funds, so they are presented separately in the audit report. And you can see the breakdown of revenues and expenditures for both general and motor fuel. I will make a note on motor fuel. I think they had a state audit which required some funds to be transferred to and from the general fund to pay back some things that were probably not expended accordingly. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, accurate. So you will see some transfers from in and out of the general fund to motor fuel tax. Okay. The next page, we do your non-major funds, and this is a summary of all the other funds: hotel, motel, TIF, probably the parking garage. There's like 5 or 6 of those. These are all combined together. So you can see the breakdown in your revenues and expenditures. This one does include, you did get a lease payable for the fire truck. You can see that in other financing sources. And then your net change in fund balance for those. And again, there's detail on the back, in the back schedules of the reports that show the breakdown of each one of the funds. The next page, we show your sewer fund. We show the assets, liabilities related to it. Sewer fund looks good. Total assets of $10,552,000 and total liabilities of $3,072,000. And then you can see the breakdown between your operating revenues and expenses. Depreciation is calculated on the use of the equipment in the plant. And then your non-operating. Okay. The next statement, we show a breakdown of your police and fire pension trusts. And you can see your total assets for, these are both of those combined, excuse me, total assets of $16,226,000. And then you can see the breakdown between the additions to the funds and the deductions, benefits, and refunds. Okay. And again, the pension liabilities related to those are in the notes. There's detail for each one, each 4 of those. As far as the audit went, all the books and records were ready and available. We had no difficulties performing the audit, other than sometimes getting the pension-related information in a timely manner. We don't really have any, I've got a couple recommendations for a couple improvements, which I will give to Peggy probably later this week, related to compensated absences and related to fixed asset purchases as well. It's kind of hard when you're doing the audit. There's a lot of different people buying different pieces of equipment. I'll probably do a recommendation related to that for maybe somebody to oversee that, or just to kind of streamline that during the audit. And we don't really have any other recommendations at this point. Like I said, it was a good audit. All the books and records they did a good job converting to a new accounting software, there was a little hiccups last year, but it seems to be smoothed out. And the records were a lot better this year. I'll just give them that. All the banks reconciled, so we were pretty happy when we walked in the door this year. So, and again, there's a lot of information in this report. I didn't go over the notes. There's related to your debt. And there's some additional information related to your capital assets.
Beth?
Thank you for the report. I have just one question on page 86, Schedule 13 that I do with the TIF report that I report every year. last year that it was listed under major governmental funds, and then this year I see that it's non-major, and I just want to know the difference, or
We do a basic calculation.
Amount.
Yeah, you have to take all the funds together, and I do a little calculation to see who fits in. And it's based on total revenues, total assets. So, yeah, we perform that every year, and they didn't meet the criteria for it, so I got to move back. Yeah. So it depends on, how much, what cash they have in the bank or what revenues they got in. Yeah.
Any other questions or discussion? Easy enough.
All right.
Thank you
Well,
very
thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
I'll get Peggy a couple recommendations for a couple small changes, but,
Thank you.
okay, thank you very much.
Moving right down, we will go to the consent agenda. We have payment of bills, approval of minutes, October 15th, 2019, committee of the whole meeting, regular city council, and regular city council meeting, November 18th, 2019. A request from the Lincoln Barbecue Committee to close various streets for the 10th Annual Pigs and Swigs Festival from Thursday, June 4th, 2020 at 4 p.m. through Sunday, June 7th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Request from Jason and Carrie Erickson to operate carriage rides on the square from Saturday, November 30th, 2019 through Saturday, December 2nd, 2019, and advise and consent to the appointment of Adam Westbecker to the Historic Preservation Commission. Mr. Gonzo, did you have a...
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. I did want to point out on the minutes for Monday, November 18th, 2019, beginning at the bottom of page 1 and continuing to page 2, there's a mention of a discussion that I had with Mrs. Rolfs about the GO bond and the TIF, specifically the alternate revenue bond for the TIF district. You'll notice at the beginning of page 2, it says she asked about $400,000 bond fee. He said it's actually a $500,000 bond fee. It's just a error there. It should be a $400 bond fee, and it's actually a $500 bond fee, not $400,000 and $500,000. So I would, if it please the council, ask that to amend that minutes to reflect that change.
Mr. Kelly?
I was just going to move to approve the consent agenda with the corrected minutes.
Kathy Horn?
Before we approve them, I think number 6D, it says through Saturday, December 2nd, 2019.
So that will go through, what date is that actually?
December
22nd?
27th. Is it 27th or 21st?
12/21 is a Saturday.
second it?
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, Ron made the motion, Kathy Schmidt seconded. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Abstain.
Under ordinances and resolution, we have the ordinance authorizing the sale of real estate. Mr. Robert?
Just for clarification purposes, council, you might want to, at the same time discussing this, discuss bids.
Mr. Welch made the motion. Do we have a second? Okay. Mr. Welch made a second. Kathy Horn seconded. Discussion. Kevin?
I believe what John is referring to is the ordinance to authorize the sale of real estate was actually the ordinance for number 8, the approval of the bid for American Water to purchase the property. Is that correct, John? So the two are one and the same.
That is correct. It's a little redundant that they're listed essentially both on the schedule at the currently. So if we're going to be discussing one, you might as well be discussing both at the same time, just to save you guys some time. Yep.
One day.
Is there any discussion or questions? Kevin?
So this vote would be for approving line 8. Is that correct, how we're doing that?
Correct. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes. Ordinance prohibiting on-site consumption of cannabis at cannabis dispensaries.
Move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Bateman made the motion. Mrs. Schmidt seconded. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Ordinance authorizing mayor to sign the loan application for CSO improvements.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Welch made the motion. Mr. Keller seconded. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
Moving down to reports, Mr. Conzo.
Thank you, Mayor. You've all received copies electronically of this report, and it'll be posted on the website as well. Unlike the audit, which is done on an accrual basis, this report is done on a cash basis, so the numbers aren't going to be exactly the same. Also, it's broken down much differently. For example, the revenue summary that I have there includes everything, including pensions, the sewers, the operating funds, general funds. And what you'll see there, $15,179,343, as opposed to last year, which was over $22 million. And if you look at that at first, and that's kind of alarming. It's a decrease of about $7.2 million. But keep in mind there were some things that we received last year that were one-time payments or that were something paid out for a limited time. For example, we had the remaining part of the high-speed rail grant. Some of those were received in the 2 years before that. Last year, we had $2,813,399 in high-speed rail grants. This year, there aren't any because that paid off. That was the end of that project. We also had bond proceeds, most of that related to the project to convert the Jefferson School into the nice police station that we have now. $3,356,000 plus there in bond proceeds. Had loan proceeds, in particular, mostly for the fire truck, $1,125,000 there. Then we had the Commonwealth Edison access and remediation. The balance of that had been paid over, I think, 3 years. And this was I believe the end of that, $1,214,730. So you don't see that in this year's revenue stream, but again, you wouldn't necessarily because those are one-time things or special things that don't occur every year. The other side of that is you see a lot more in the expenditures, and that's because for example, we received that money, we started paying out for the construction of the police station. That wasn't complete until the current year, and there were also other things that were paid out from revenues received in the previous year. You'll also notice the salaries are a little higher than they were last year. That's to be expected. We had increases built into the contracts for fire, police, as well as street department. That's reflected in there. It's not a huge increase, though, really over what we had last year. Same thing with the fire pension, police pension payments. Those are a little higher than they were, but all in all, they weren't significantly higher. Laurie talked a lot in the audit about about the pension obligations and the post-employment benefit obligations, and you really study that. That is not reflected in this report that I do because this is strictly a cash basis. But what hers takes, the audit takes into consideration all liabilities, and those things are considered liabilities. And if you look at the summary that she did of the audit, they've now calculate those post-employment benefits differently. Well, that adds another $6 million in liabilities because of the way that's now calculated, and also the pension liabilities are $34 million. So you figure that in, and those liabilities far outweigh the assets. That isn't necessarily reflected in our in the report that I do because it strictly deals with what we take in and what we spend in a given year. You'll notice, and I know I won't go through this, line by line with you, but it lists every expenditure of $300 or more. They're itemized here. That's far below the legal requirement of what we have to list, but I thought it was in the interest of transparency. I've always tried to do that. Everything less than $200, if you add it all up, it's $11,233, and a lot of that is small reimbursements, employee reimbursements, and things of that sort. And some of them, I think the smallest one we had was $1 or something. So we don't want to list each and every one of those things. This report will be, in addition to the fact it'll be on the website, it will be printed in the pages of the Courier, and I believe that'll occur on Saturday, December 7th. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Condon? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving down then to new business and communications, we have the approval of liability insurance agreement between Arthur J. Gallagher and the City of Lincoln, effective December 15th, 2019, in the amount of $494,304.
Motion approved.
Second. Tracy made the motion, Jeff seconded. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Approval of City of Lincoln financial audit.
Second.
Mr. Parrott made the motion, Mr. Keller seconded. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
I know it's too late to ask, but was that only the correction that was this morning when we saw that, from what we got tonight to what we had on the audit? Remember we talked about the Mount Pulaski and that she corrected?
She corrected the page.
Right, but that's the only kind of correction we saw from.
Yeah, there was no numbers.
Nothing from any
There was
of
no
the-
numbers that was corrected. There was in the audit there was a page, it was a letter, and it had the wrong town
Yeah,
in it.
that's all.
And she corrected it since
Yeah.
then. Yeah.
Okay, moving down, we have the approval of proposal from Petersburg Plumbing and Excavating for repair and replacement of sewer lines and roadway at the intersection of 4th and Decatur Streets in an amount not to exceed $419,425.
Move to approve.
Second.
Kathy Horn made the motion, Steve Parrott seconded. Discussion? Tracy?
Mr. Conzo, did you have an opportunity to look into the financial aspect of this request?
I have looked at that. I have not had the opportunity to discuss it with anybody since that time. The only way you're really that I can see that you're going to be able to pay for it out of this year's budget is if you look at, you've got two things that I see that you can look at. One is the capital expense for sewer construction. There's money left in that, and then you've got we got $3.5 million in the long-term control plan budget. I don't know how far we'll get with that this year, and I was hoping to have some opportunity to talk with the people in the sewer department to see if we were going to come close to using all of that this year. If not, if we don't get to that point, we may be able to amend the budget accordingly to use some of that for this construction. But there's no new revenue from anywhere that is going to
Didn't
magically
figure there
appear.
would be. Thank you.
Jeff?
I'll again ask Walt what his opinion with the street, what, if we should do something because of the weather and the cold, if we should be doing something different temporarily.
Well, after further discussion with Anthony last week, there's a lot of variables. Number one, if we do the project, will we be able to get any flowable fill for the project at all because the concrete plant's closed down because of the weather, the cold weather. So there's just a lot of things that could come into play that we don't know where we're going to be at and the timing of it and what's going to be available for the project. So I think some type of temporary, if it goes as planned, some type of temporary cold patch on top instead of concrete would be more beneficial than going ahead and just doing a concrete surface on the trench repair. Something that we can, next season we can mill up and resurface completely instead of having to work around a concrete patch.
So your opinion would be option 2 then, or?
Option 2, and maybe instead of, we could do some alternates in there and see what the difference price would be for like a cold patch repair on top of the CA6 or on top of the flowable fill. Or if we have to, we can go ahead with the cap of the CA6 and just have to maintain. But yes, option 2 would be my preference over number 1.
Jeff?
Well, I guess, obviously, we can't see into the future what's going to happen, but I just didn't want to cap it at 371,000, and if something needs to be a little bit over because of the weather, or because of the product, or whatever. Should we just keep it at the 419, not to exceed 419, and work with what we have, or if it comes in a lesser amount?
That gives you contingency built into it that
Right.
it could be helpful. Hopefully not, but you know how these projects can go.
Right.
They could run into something once they start the repair that throws a curveball at it, and it's going to add cost to it.
Tracy and Kevin?
So I would prefer to see the cold patch put in for the reasons I stated last week. It's just another thing that the Streets and Alley Department is going to have to continually maintain until that road's properly addressed. So I'm assuming, Walt, looking at these numbers, that the cold patch cost lies somewhere in between option 1 and 2. The 371 and the 419.
Yes, I would assume so. Yes.
And still give us a little bit of a contingency with that option.
Yes.
So, yeah, not to exceed the 419.
Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with Tracy and Jeff that we should keep it at the 419 because we are undertaking this project in the middle of winter. There's so many variables that could happen, and this is one of the older streets in Lincoln, so we have no way of knowing what we find once we dig in there. So I'm putting my faith in the department heads to get this thing fixed correctly and in a manner where they have the ability to patch the road to get us to spring and determine the road surface at that time instead of trying to come up with a permanent solution over Christmas break and it not work out. Plus, there's settling and everything else. That is a highly trafficked road, so by the time summer break comes, it should be settled down enough to where we can make an accurate determination of what kind of road surface we want to put on it.
Jeff?
Yeah, to sum it all up, I just wanted to make sure that the public knew that we're voting on, it says a concrete road patch, and again, we're putting our trust and faith into the department heads again to make work with what they can with the weather and product availability and all that, so.
Steve?
Further west you go after Carroll Catholic, maybe up to college, it gets pretty bad. I mean, it's like real bad, right?
There's a section of, especially the next block, the 200 block, the surface is pretty unlevel. Actually, the next 2 to 3 blocks
Yeah.
are pretty bad. But that's something that the sewers need to be assessed in those areas for one thing, before you do any street work. And then we need to decide what we want to do with the street, because that's currently concrete. So we'd have to look at our options as far as replacing the concrete and what methods we'd want to use to do that. But before all, you'd have to assess the sewers and make sure that there wasn't any more repairs that need to be done along there before you start replacing a street.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Parrott?
Yes.
Mr. Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Haneke?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mrs. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Under announcements, I'm going to hand it to Beth real quick for first one.
Okay, today, we had the honor of having 3 delegates come from China that are affiliated with their university with City of Lincoln, well, Lincoln College, Lincoln University now. And so we did present them with a certificate and gave them a little watermelon and a little watermelon plaque thing. So anyway, it was really nice, and I think they enjoyed it. This was the only city they were coming to, and then they were heading up to Chicago and flying out by Thursday. So it was a quick trip, but we got invited to China. We'd like to go, so I see the expense on that one. Oh, yes, and so then they gave the mayor got a nice little teapot with a little lid on it, and made of clay, handmade. It was very, very nice. And then I got what they call white tea, and I haven't opened it yet, but it's white tea, and then it crumbles off, and it's like, I guess, 5 years old right now, and the older it gets, the more tastier, the better it is as it ages. So I'll have to break off a chunk for all of you. It was very nice.
A few other announcements. Obviously, the tree lighting this last Friday was a success. Thanks to Kathy Williams, Tourism, and everyone else that did that. Saturday in downtown was packed. I don't know how many of you were also down there, but I wasn't. It was great. I think all the businesses were very happy with that. There is a ribbon cut Saturday at noon, Sunday at noon, at 222 North McLean Street for A Perfect Escape. That is the old Knee Realty building for anyone that doesn't know where it is, and it's at noon on Sunday. Christmas parade is this Thursday at 6:30.
6:30 or 5:30?
I was thinking it was
Line up at 5:30, kick off at 6:30.
Yeah, so lineup starts at 5:30, parade at 6:30.
The fire truck is going to be in slot number 1. We're going to meet here at 6 o'clock for the mayor and 2 of the aldermen that are going to ride. Everybody else can walk along the side. They said to be there before 6:15 for lineup, and they're going to start promptly at 6:30. And the lineup with the fire truck is at McLean and Wyatt.
We have other announcements? Oh, Walt, sorry.
Yep, it's that time of year again with Lincoln Youth Wrestling will be hosting the Lincoln Railer Rumble this Sunday at the high school. So we'll have 450 wrestlers from all over the state and some of the surrounding states here competing. So if you're interested or want to see some good wrestling, come on out to the high school. Wrestling starts at 9 o'clock.
Great. We have other announcements? Oh, yes. So I've teamed up with the Lincoln Land CEO class at the high school, and they wanted to pick out a few houses in December that exemplified pride and decor and so forth. So the first one that's actually going to be the home of the month will be this Wednesday at 4:45, and it's 112 Palmer Avenue. The owner is Danny Poulos. It's a smaller home that he has invested a lot of time and money into decorating. So if you have not seen it, take a drive-by and or feel free to join us Wednesday at 4:45. every week for the rest of December, the class will actually pick a home and we will do a presentation. And they're excited about it. I think it's going to be neat. So I'll keep you all updated on what those homes are each week. But again, this Wednesday will be 4:45, basically for a sunset type picture with the decor. Yep. Norm?
What was that address again?
112 Palmer Avenue. Any other announcements?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Welch made the motion. Mr. Kettler seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting is adjourned at 7:35 PM. Thank you.